we're back. This is TrendingSA on SABC3 and on TrendingSA.tv. Thank you so much for all of your love on social media. We love receiving it from you. Now, tonight's guest is a trailblazer, a household name in South African television, landing roles in local shows like Generations and Zabalaza, and in the internationally acclaimed film Hotel Rwanda. Undoubtedly one of the most awe-inspiring people you could ever meet. In her latest book, Reclaiming the Soil, she shares her journey of rediscovering and details her struggle of finding her true African self. She has described herself as born of the Bafokeng nation, but raised in a Jewish household. Very few people know the depth of her story, so she's here to share some of it with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Rosie Motene. First of all, welcome to our show. Thank you. It's so good to have you here. There's so much that I want to ask you all at the same time, but maybe let's start in television, right? Yes. So can we throw back to the Generations days? So this is when everyone got to know you. You became this household name.
When I had like a 32-inch waist.
Back then. Okay, so apart from that, some of the other highlights or memories that stand out for you from that time?
You know, Generations, I don't think people really understood what Mfundi did when he put Generations on. Sorry to use the analogy, but it was what the Cosby Show did for black people in the 70s, what Generations did for us.
100%.
For the first time, you saw black people on screen who were powerful, they were amazing, they were running their own businesses, they weren't thugs, they didn't fall into those stereotypes. And it was a crazy ride.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And then you left at the peak of, I mean, what everyone would think is the height of your fame, maybe your success in television. What led to that decision?
You know, when you get into something, whatever you're going to do in life, there comes to a point where you think, okay, my time here is up.
Yeah.
And that had happened with Generations, because when I went in only 2 years. That was my game plan.
Okay.
So it lasted another 4.5 years.
Okay.
And it was after I'd given my first talk at Johannesburg prison, and I'd been working for Power, and it was the first time I was giving a talk. And
this is people opposing women abuse. Yes.
And I gave a talk to 1,500 sexual offenders. And originally when I went in, I thought there's going to be a cage, I'm going to be protected, and literally the dudes were there and I was here and I was like, okay, Rosie, now this is the time where you're either going to sink or swim. And literally I had them on their haunches listening to me, and on my drive home, I was driving back to the studio, I'm thinking, this is what I need to be also doing. And for the first time in my life, I felt as if I was going to work. And so I called my agent, I was like, we need to make a change.
And what was your agent's response?
She was ecstatic, because she didn't. I mean, she was like, you know what, your time is up on Generations. We can do other stuff. What do you want to do? Do you want to give a bit of time to think about it? I was like, no, I'm going to put in my notice. And I went back. It was time before iPads, all of that. I had to get down to the computer, log on, typed up my thing. And
so you're saying that your like purpose shifted, and you wanted to go into the more philanthropic advocacy,
the activism, but also because I was driving to SABC studios from Sun City Prison. The first time I felt as if I was going to work,
and then you must drop.
And up until then, it never ever felt like work. So I was like, okay.
Versatile. Your new book, When a Momo, Reclaiming the Soul, a Black Girl's Struggle to Find Her African Self, by Rosie Motene. Which the book is about your relationship with your parents, being raised by your mother's white employer. And at what point did you feel that you have to reclaim or find your African self?
You know, the journey started over 10 years ago. It was at a point where I was very, very confused. I was going through a stage of betrayal from my foster parents. And I started to a lot of therapy, and I advocate for therapy. And my therapist was like, just put everything down on paper, just you know. And as I was doing that and going through these sessions, I realized that there was so much in my life, in my past, that I hadn't dealt with. From when I was a baby, growing up, everything. And so I just started writing, and then at one point I was like, no, I need to put this into a book form and start telling my story. And then I retracted, then I went back, and then finally got to the point where, okay, I was like, okay, now it's time to, and the book was finished about 2.5 years ago, but I procrastinated. And then unfortunately, you know, my biological father passed away, and in the last 4 years of his life, that's when I actually made the decision to move home. So I woke up one day, was going through a bit of turmoil in my life, and I was on the highway and I got a pain on my left side, and I pulled over and something said, go home. And I called Mama, I said, I need to come home. And she was like, of course, come home. And I saw the sign, extra space. I don't know where it came from, this number. Called them, I said, I need to put my stuff into storage. Packed up, crying all this time, thinking, what the hell am I doing? And for those who don't know, I didn't live in Pogeng. Yes, I'd been there, but I'd spent so much time away. So I didn't know the language, the culture, the tradition. Never lived under my parents' roof. I was 38 years old, had my little Renault, packed what I had up, the rest into storage, and I drove home. And growing up, Pogeng was always my place of threat. So my foster family would say, you know, you've done something bad, we're going to send you to Pogeng. And then driving home was the first time that I thought there was this sense of ease and the sense of peace. And I cried and cried. And it was supposed to be like a 2 to 3 month phase, because in fact it was 3 months, because that's the amount of storage I took out. And 18 months later I was still there, realizing that I needed to discover a lot about myself, but also about my father, and the fact that I had resented him for so long because I compared him to my foster father. And getting to know him, which for me was the most phenomenal experience, because when we did say goodbye to him, and that in itself was a traumatic event, because he was in ICU and taken out, and he passed away at a government hospital. But when I buried him, I understood the phenomenal man that he was. And I understood what it meant to be a Motene, and where I come from, that I'm from Pogeng. And Pogeng actually means, Po means dew in Tswana. And when they discovered the area, there's a lot of dew in the morning. So that's where the name Pogeng came from. So all this richness and culture that I suddenly was like, wait a minute, I was like ashamed of growing up. You know, I didn't want to be that person. You know, from the little girl that you see in this picture.
Yeah, with the collar popped.
You know what I'm saying? That used to go to bed and say, God, just please let me wake up with blonde hair so I can make my hair into a bobble. You know, that dismissed her own mother. You know, refused to speak her language. Hated being black.
I mean, the conflict of, look, I don't know the dynamics. I haven't read your book yet. I can't wait to read your book. The conflict of knowing that someone is taking care of you and wanting to love your family, but the confusion of the abandonment, because there's abandonment on both sides, because you feel you're abandoning whoever you're not loving. I mean, do you want to unpack that a bit for me? I see it, and I think a lot of people have experienced this. Talk about abandonment in the space for me.
You know, it's abandonment, but it's also conditional versus unconditional love. And that is incredibly, when I unpacked that in therapy, and realizing that I had this family that, whenever I talk about it, I want to choke up, but that were there. And I was a brat. And not once did my sister ever criticize what I was going through. Not once did her children ever turn around and say, you're a terrible aunt. But they're there. And then the family that I always put, and I made a quote in the book, I said, you know, the family that I always put on the back burner, were always there. And that realization and that power that you reclaim, hence the name, it's reclaiming that, is totally underestimated, and I think it's something that's very, very important when people do decide to foster families or decide to adopt families. You know, and I was speaking to another girl today who actually grew up down the road from me, but she was 10 years younger. So she had the exact same life, except her parents, her mother had passed away and her grandmother passed away. So it was just her in this white Jewish home. But the difference that she had was that she didn't have to deal with the apartheid, but also, yes, she had the division of being this black kid in a white home, but never one-sided in terms of calling. I mean, I called my foster mom Mommy, and I called my biological mom Bumbo, which was a nickname that were given by the foster parents because she was fat, so it was Fatty Boom Boom.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Rosie.
and only calling her Mama when I had the strength when we went home.
But Rosie, the conflict is in the fact that you're aware that these people are doing something good for you. And there's this gratitude and appreciation. And does that gratitude and appreciation extend to now?
It does, and that was where a lot of the conflict came in,
Yes.
because the feud that happened in the home, and it's in the book, was that the one son came home with a non-white woman, and there was the family were up against that, and I'm like, but
How?
yeah, and so that for me was confusion, and that for me was betrayal, and me saying, but listen to me, no, you're different.
Oh.
And then I'm like, but you know, I'm a motivational speaker. People speak there, but in my home, nobody's hearing me. You don't hear me. And so dealing with that in itself, and then getting through the rest of it, and then forgiving yourself. And to be honest, I only started forgiving myself the last maybe 3 years ago when my doctor said to me, okay, so we've reached this, great. But what about you? And I'm like, no, fine. No, Rosie, this isn't set. Let's. Have you looked at Rosie in the mirror and what we are? You know, so it's those different levels of unpacking and dealing with. And there's still so much that I still need to deal with. But where I've come from and where I've taken that step forward and taken it back. You know, and my book has changed over the years. And I remember interviewing Zolega Mandela after her book. Yeah. And I said to her, I was like, you know, you come from such a prominent family, yet you were so brutally honest.
Yeah, she was.
And she said to me, she goes, Rosie, if you're not going to tell your full story, don't tell it at all. And that's where I took a step back, and then I was like, okay. So I went back to the drawing board, and I brought up issues of my abortion, because I realized that I'd buried that for such a long time, and I needed to deal with that.
Yeah.
I brought up the issues of abuse. I brought up the different areas where I was horrible to my biological mother, but brutally horrible. You know.
Rosie, I can tell that there's so much more that we want to ask you and that can be said. So will you stay until the end of the show?
Of course.
Okay, brilliant.
Course.
We've got Rosie Motene in studio, Reclaiming the Soil. That's the name of the book. We'll be right back. This is Trending SA on 3. You okay?
Yeah, you know what?
We can't get enough feeling. Forget about your feet.
I'm so triggered.
You know, I feel like we should have an after the show special, right? That's only exclusive online. TrendingSA.tv is where you can catch us, and we're here on SABC3. We're still here with our guest for tonight, Rosie Motene, and a black girl's struggle to find her African self. So you spoke, Rosie, about finding yourself in the midst of the family dichotomy and dilemma, but then you also speak about it's as if one person can't go through all of these things, you know, and yet here you are. Recently you spoke out in a radio interview about the hashtag Me Too kind of situation that's akin to what's happening in the States, about something that happened to you in the entertainment industry. So you've told the story, and everyone knows that people keep quiet. People don't want to talk out. What is in place to protect those who do speak out?
You know, at the moment, there are very few spaces, and that's why I've been so vigilant and so loudmouthed for the last 15 years in terms of activism, because we need to create those safe spaces, and so we're doing that. And now with the hashtag, and the hashtag for South Africa is That's Not Okay, which comes about from SWIFT, which is Sisters Working in Film and Television. It was also very important for me to put my name to that, to explain to a lot of these girls that, look, it isn't just you who's trying to get in the industry. when somebody's involved, it gets into a situation that is either sexual harassment, whether it's abuse or whether it's rape. It's not necessarily about you; it's about power. And it's about power of the perpetrator, and we need to understand those dynamics. Number two, we need to understand the dynamics that we need to stop blaming the survivor, the person who speaks out, which is very, very important. And I felt that it was very, very important to talk about it because another incident that had happened a couple of years ago on another set, where I wasn't sexually harassed, but I was put into a corner where the producers were trying to make me take off my clothing and do certain sex scenes and so forth. And all of these things were in my contract, which I said I didn't want to. And then there was the meetings that we had. Okay, we're not going to do it. And then they kept on trying and doing it. Cut a long story short, I ended up resigning. They said sorry, and then afterwards I was still blamed. And now the new management of Urban Brew have actually come forward and said, listen, this is not going to happen again. And so although that had happened, a lot of change is going to be happening within the industry.
You know what I think? I think we need to thank you. I think you're a trailblazer. I think the most outspoken and honest ones, the ones who are the tall poppies, are the ones who get shot down. So thank you for putting these things in place for us and for all of those who come after us. Rosie Motene, everybody, our guest on Trending SA on SABC3. Go out and get the book, Reclaiming the Soil. That's it. We're back again tomorrow on SABC3. Bye-bye.